Hello. Let's let everybody in. Good morning, everybody.
Good
Oh
morning.
my goodness. It's good
Hello.
to see everybody. Judith, are you there?
I'm
Yeah.
here. I'm doing about 8 million things at the same time today.
Oh,
Yeah.
aren't we all?
I know.
It is a interesting day as we move through summer, as we plow through summer. I we have some people that are still traveling and out of town, like the
Yeah.
Stallman are still in Africa and
Yep.
doing
Some,
some traveling. And
some gorilla hunting. Have you seen any pictures?
yeah, they sent me some of their gorilla pictures. It seems like you're real close to gorillas there. So I'm
And
scared.
the
I have
good
to
time.
admit,
The good time. The good
I
kind.
have to admit, I've been on safari before and seen lions and those kind of things, cheetahs, but I got to tell you, I'm a little bit more scared of the gorilla. You know why? I think because they're too much like us, and I just would like
Yeah.
think if you just caught a gorilla on a bad day, it'd just pull you apart. I they just seem so similar to us that, I'd be like, yeah, if somebody came into my house and was bugging me one morning, I'd just pull you apart. So I that's what worries me about it.
I don't disagree.
There's just something weird about it. I'm like, no, 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 don't do that. Don't bug them. It
I
just
think
because
chimpanzees are more dangerous.
What are more
what
dangerous
happened?
I think chimpanzees are actually probably more dangerous
than
Maybe,
gorillas?
in a sense, because I think people think they're safe around chimpanzees and they're not.
maybe, but I'm telling you, the closer you get to us, the more frightened I get because I know how dangerous we are. So maybe,
That's true.
I don't know. Maybe that's just my own little thing about it. I look
That'd
at
be
them.
interesting to look up whether there are more people uh, get into trouble with gorillas or chimpanzees.
Yeah, I don't know, but whatever.
I would bet chimpanzees because they're also more curious.
Any of the
Yeah.
primates. But like I said, it's because they're like us. And speaking of being like us, and thinking about weird human behavior, that's what we're going to talk about today.
Not bad
I
transition. That's a
I
pretty good segue.
I was talking to somebody about the Bible recently, and I said, "What is so amazing is how flawed everybody is in the Bible." And I really do believe it's because the people that wrote, or the main writer of Genesis, the J writer, is the same writer who's writing about King David, and he's making sure. I think part of the issue is once King David decided, and again, I have to say, King David authorized the biography, or people within his family authorized the unauthorized biography, whatever, of King David, the dirt part. Once they decided to do that, I think that then the conscious decision was, let's make sure everybody knows that all of our other ancestors were also kind of messed up. So I think that there was a conscious decision, by writers and editors to do this, to show the link to these people. We're going to talk about it as we get into this cycle now. That's the thing where we can look at Jacob and the Joseph stories and then compare them to later stories that you have in the book of Samuel. And it's clear that I mean, to me at least, it's clear that it's the same writer, and that that at least part of the decisions to have these stories in Genesis is to make sure that people know that, yeah, this is just who we are. And if you think David is that bad, well, look at Judah, the guy that, he's the guy that our tribe is named after. So as we go through these stories, you'll see it. And I do think what's really amazing about this, and we'll see it, start. We saw a little bit already with Jacob, is the is how well these stories are written and how developed the characters are. So, I'll be interested to hear, especially Floyd's take on some of this as a professor. somebody who studied literature, great literature, to reflect on this, Floyd. So anytime you want to jump in, please jump in. We because we're getting into a cycle of stories, the Jacob cycle. So we saw it a little bit already in the kind of the stories of Jacob and Esau, uh, which set up some of the family dysfunction, but also national dysfunction, because international dysfunction, because it's the story of the Israelites and the Edomites, one of their nearest, um, national international rivals on the other side of the border. And so we're going to see um, some really interesting stories that reflect back on these, and again on earlier stories, which is why it's a cycle of stories, a cycle of narratives. And again, I don't like doing it, and I always sigh when I do it. But when we look at the authorship and when we pull out the strands, sometimes we have a I think we have a better appreciation of how tight these stories actually are, because sometimes when the stories are woven together, you're like, What's that about?" And it seems to almost contradict and knock the flow out. But that's because the editor, much later editor, wanted to get another point across. And what we read last week when we read the story in chapter 27 of and at the end of the day, I mean, this is the Bible we have. But when we talked about Jacob and Esau ending, when Jacob steals the blessing, and then Esau says, "What about me? Don't I get a blessing?" And then they Rebecca basically says, we gotta Rebecca says, "We gotta get you out of here. We gotta get you to my brother." And the she's very clear about it by saying, "Stay with him until your brother's fury subsides," where she's basically saying, like, maybe he'll eventually calm down. Um, and then we have this other story that's woven in there, which is, we got to get Jacob a wife from those people, because if he winds up marrying Canaanite women, then we're not in a good situation. And then we have Isaac again. This is the P author, the priestly author, who says to Jacob, "You will not marry these Canaanite women." And it says he blessed him. Well, we already know he blessed him. Well, the P author doesn't care about the blessing we just read. He didn't write that part. And so the story really becomes one, in for this author, of Jacob doing exactly what Isaac did, which is marry a woman from Abraham's family. So that's what we finished with. We finished with these stories of the marriage, which, as I pointed out, is actually the way chapter 27 begins, which is, or end of chapter 26, which is, when Esau was 40 years old, he took to wife Judith and Basimot, who are Hittite women. And it says right there that they were a source of bitterness. But really, this paragraph and this paragraph are the other author, are the P author. So the P author also tells us that Esau, of course, realizes this and then ends up marrying um, a daughter of um, Ishmael, um, and so kind of marries in back into Abraham's family through his wife, Mahalat. So,
Rabbi,
yeah,
I'm going to interrupt you here.
yes, please.
As long as you kind of called on me.
No, I did.
Yeah, you did. And I have to say that because the Dodgers have done so well in the last week or so, that it allowed me to think a little bit more than I would normally do about this lesson, the chapter 27. Um, and there are a couple of things that really spoke out to me. I hope it's okay to go backward
Please,
instead of
no,
going.
I intended to. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, it seems like I've heard a lot of people say this phrase that Hineni always is playing this. It's so important to say, here I
Yeah.
am. In chapter 27, it seems like a recurring question, both in terms of the narrative and in terms of the actual verses, is the question, who are you? Who are you? And it seems, as I was thinking about this, I thought, well, if all the characters are flawed, and if certainly they are, and if the question, who are you, should be directed both inwardly and outwardly, it's the question of who are we as well. Who are we in this? We're clearly the flawed character. In verse, I think it was 32,
Yeah.
Isaac says,
Yeah.
who are you directly? But before then, the question of just, are we who we appear to be? Are we the recipients of this deception? Do we have it in our DNA to be somebody we're not? And that theme is really in that chapter. And then I started thinking, and I
No,
hope
no, wait, but wait, before you leave that, are you going to leave that idea? Because that idea is huge.
no, I'm not going to leave it.
So,
I was
okay.
just
So, yeah.
I was just going to bring up a whole nother thing about, it's the same theme though, about King Lear. And in King Lear, we have two parallel ideas. One with the evil daughters instead of the sons pretending to be somebody who we're not, and we have the other subplot of Gloucester who was blinded and fooled by his sons. Who are we? And the question of who we are and who we should be seems to be dominant in this incredible chapter. You were right when you last week. Not that you need me to affirm it, but this is a remarkable story, and it appears often, of course, throughout literature. But I always harken back to Shakespeare because that's what I know better than most works that I know, and this theme of self-identity and who we are and who we think we are applies to the readers as well as the characters in the narrative.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And that's why when you realize that, and that's kind of why I said that look, there was a political statement about this saying, yeah, I know you guys are going to say David did all these things, but guess what? This is human nature. This is what our ancestors did. This is part of who we are. And again, before you condemn his behavior, let's look at ourselves. This repeated, that's why it's again so well written. When Isaac the he, when he says again, and he says it, this is where this is not accidental writing. When 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 J, when Jacob comes to Isaac and Jacob says to him, "Which of my sons are you?" Right? And he says to him again, "Are you really Esau or not?" Right? And then when he says to Esau, when he comes in, "Who are you?" That's not like it's not if the story had been written with, and then Esau came in and Isaac was frightened because he had, but when he says, when the writing, when it actually, like, it blows my mind that someone thousands of years, 3,000 years ago wrote, "Who are you?" Because that's intentional. That's literally intent. That's not, that's where when people say, well, the Torah is oral stories and that there was this and that. No, this is really powerful writing where the writer purposely has the character saying, "Who are you?" It's not just the reveal, it's the way it was written. And when this is when to Floyd's point, this isn't just this story. This is the question that God first asks a human being when he says to Adam, "Where are you?" Ayeka, which is also, again, who are you? What are you doing? It's the answer he's supposed to say is Hineni, here I am. But he doesn't. He doesn't even answer the question. So this idea of who are you, Miata, is 100% the the is there a Hineni there? Is there first of all, he lied. I mean, Jacob lied by saying, again, who he was and Hineni essentially. And so this theme of hiding with Adam and then of course when God calls out Cain and Cain lies and says, "What am I?" And Sarah, is confronted about, her not believing and she lies and you know this deception that these characters go through that it's totally exposed by the writer, totally exposed for us to see, is of course a statement about what we do, what every human being does. I'm going to have it. It's going to continue on. It's to some extent, it's the major theme in Joseph. Joseph putting on clothes, putting on, dressing up as an Egyptian. I'm not going to ruin the story, but one of the critical scenes in Genesis is when Joseph's brothers come to him and he doesn't reveal himself. This idea of disguise, of hiding, of essentially characters being confronted with who are you, is one of Genesis, one of the central themes of Genesis, and of course is the question that we ask ourselves. John, you guys are here.
I just no, we're not. I just wanted to say hello to everybody. I wanted to
Well,
check in just so
we
you know
already
that
we,
you've now
we,
had the farthest person to check
we,
in.
we already talked about you and the gorillas in the
Yeah,
mist.
I'm checking in from Serengeti,
That's
but we got to
amazing.
run
Well,
because we just got to camp and we're gonna go have some chow. But I want to say hi to
right.
everybody. That's all.
All right. Well, it's good to see you guys. I'm glad you were thinking about us. We were thinking about you. When you go back and watch this, you'll hear we talked about you in
I
the
will.
beginning. All right, guys,
All
take
right.
care and,
Take
and
care.
make sure you
See
read
you.
this because this is a big section. Anyways,
Okay.
yeah. So
Good night,
this
everybody.
is really good night, guys. Take care. Be careful. Be careful there. On the road. That is
I'm a
actually
Scooby snack.
that's one of the themes today too. But yeah, you missed a very important teaching from Floyd. So go watch it later.
I will.
Yeah, take care. So when we think about these themes in Genesis of, and again, I would say the call out through humanity, which is, Ayeka, where are you? And to say Hineni, it's definitely something we're going to think about, by the way, another important segue to the high holidays, which are only a couple of weeks away. When the cantor does the Chazan's prayer, Hineni, he's doing it on behalf of course, everybody, and helping us ask that question every year as we start our years. Who are we? Miata, like who are we? Who are we pretending to be? Uh, what disguises are we wearing? And whether this year, we're going to be our real selves, our better selves, hopefully, because can we really attain, teshuva? Can we really become who we're supposed to be if we're living a false, if we're living a false identity? And so, we can't really attain that if we're not first true to ourselves, and then at some level not just true to ourselves, because that's not enough. Judaism doesn't ask us to be, this is the real me, take it or leave it. Judaism says, be the real you and be a better version, be the best version of that you. Don't just say, well, that's who I am, take it or leave it. We say, yeah, we want you to be true, but we also want you to be a good version of that person. Don't just say, well, that's who I am, because that's part of what we live with in American society is going around going, well, this is the me, this is the real me, this is, take it or leave it, love it or leave it, this is who I am. No, that's only part of it, but it's an important part of it. So again, Isaac not being able to see, um, of course, also is a statement of you know the way that we Isaac in some ways, and it's interesting because he is in every way almost, he's the foil, right? He's the character that everyone else acts out on and of course, to some extent, represents everybody, right? The humanity, like the other, because Isaac Isaac is just doing his job. He's just living his life, and he's not the character that's doing stuff. He's not the protagonist, and he's not the actor, right? But he almost represents everybody else because Isaac, to some extent, is the person or the people that we're deceiving. You know, Isaac's the person that when we aren't our true selves and try to hide, Isaac is that other one who can't really see us. And to some extent, the if you will, the Bible actually gives him really kind of cuts him a break or at least excuses it because he's actually blind. He actually can't see. It's not like he's being duped because he's stupid or is naive or is in denial. I mean, that all might be part of what's going on too, but it's not really because he can't see. And so he can be deceived. And so, it's just easier for him to be deceived. But of course, we do that with everybody. Look, there's a whole nother level here, which I also, to some extent, wanted to get into, and maybe we'll get into it today or maybe next week. There's not a rush because he's not going away, is Esau. Because we didn't really talk about Esau, and there's a whole level here about Esau and what he represents that I touched on, but I really did not give it a fair exposure here, and I promise I will at some point to talk about Esau because there's a whole nother dimension there, and again, he's not going away, so maybe we'll come back. But he is. We've already seen what happens to him. He's been essentially, he's. I was
He's
going to
been
say,
marginalized.
yeah, he's been screwed out of. I was going to say he's been screwed out of his blessing and his inheritance. But we're going to talk about him and what he represents because I think there's a lot there. I mean, I've thought about it a lot. Other Jewish, rabbis and other people who've talked about what Esau represents to us in a modern world, in a modern sense. So we will come back to this because we have not given Esau a fair discussion yet. And again, the rabbis traditionally there is no redeeming or very little redeeming qualities about Esau because even in his pain, there's a certain well, you deserve it, and for the rabbis, because Esau represented the Gentiles, the Romans, the Christians, you know, we're going to make sure that he doesn't have a lot of redeeming qualities and that we're not going to focus on what he does represent. But I think the more modern readings, the more modern psychological readings, and I would also say the readings that reflect a different type of Judaism. I'll leave it at that. That's a little mystery, but the type of way we see ourselves today as Jews is maybe affecting the way we see Esau.
I'm
Um,
Team Esau. This reading through, I'm Team Esau. I
well,
think he's gotten a bum rap for the most part. Not completely, obviously, he's not perfect, but I think he's the quote unquote black sheep, and uh, Jacob and Rebecca could have quote unquote kept him in the fold, if you will, and they didn't. So there you go. I'm Team Esau.
okay. Well, I think I think again for people who wanted to construct a narrative where Esau represents, and again, this is not an excuse for what we did to Esau throughout history necessarily, but when people wanted to read it with a certain intention, which is let's try to explain anti-Semitism and hatred, how does it or our problems with certain Gentiles, using Esau as the archetype um,
This,
was definitely powerful. It's interesting that Esau maybe because he was more ascribed to the Romans and then the Christians, and because we're less scared of today. I mean, let's be honest, we're less fearful of Christians than our grandparents and great grandparents were. It's a little different. Interestingly, Esau very rarely, and I'd say never, rarely takes on the modern threats to Israel and Jews, which would be more from the Middle East and more from Islam
Ishmael.
than yes, and that's why. But Ishmael is not as problematic of a character as Esau is, so it's why it's a little different. We'll get
He's
to it a
not as
little.
deeply drawn. He's not as
Yeah,
deeply drawn either.
yeah, and he's not.
Ishmael.
It's not. Ishmael has problems, but they're not Esau's problems. And again, yes, you're right. He's not as there's not as much material, and the rivalry is never fully articulated because Ishmael doesn't seem to want to have that rivalry or is struggling for that rival. We don't get Ishmael's take on being thrown out of the house. But I mean, there's definitely, you can make the argument, there's food for food for thought there. There's fodder. But anyways, but we will come back to Esau, and um we'll talk about the Jacob Esau rivalry because it's not over, because Jacob and Esau do come back together. And there's actually even a midrash on some of what's happening here. But we'll read, we left off here with the blessing that Jacob gets from his father in the P author, which is, it's another blessing. And this is the way the Torah portion, Toldot, ends. And this is kind of where um, we get the blessing that with this few line blessing that it's a little different, and then we finalize with Esau having his marriage to um, Abrahamic peoples. So now we get into this part of chapter 28, which is the text that we're going to look at today, which is, yeah. So going back, by the way, we haven't even fully gone. We're going to go back at another time to the Esau stuff. But so yeah, we never leave anything. We're always, it's always there, especially in Genesis and especially in these Jacob cycles. But we are gonna get to this new text, which is I called it Jacob or God on the Road, which is also appropriate for the summer when a lot of us travel and a lot of us uh, are not necessarily always in the place that we call home, but we're going to read about Jacob encountering God for the first time. So the first part of chapter 28, and again, the Jewish break here, I think, makes more sense, which is that is part of one story, even again with the editing and putting in the peace story of the marriages. This makes sense. The Christian authors had it with ending with this, which I think is not even a good break for that part of the story, which is the marriage story. But the Jewish story definitely ends with the marriages, or Ishmael's, I mean, Esau's marriages. So chapter 28, verse 10 is the journey. And this is when Jacob actually goes on the road to find that wife. That's where we are. So I don't know, Rosemary, would you like to start us on the road?
Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He came upon a certain place and stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. He had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached to the sky, and angels of God were going up and down on it. And standing beside him was God, who said, I am the Eternal, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The ground on which you are lying, I will assign to you and to your offspring. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is a weird way for God to kind of end a prayer, which blessing, which is, I won't leave you until I've done what I promised you. Like, what does that mean? Like God leaves us at a certain point? Like, but again, you understand the point of it, which is that I'm going to protect you. So, let's talk about what goes on here in this encounter. First of all, Jacob leaves Beersheba. He leaves Canaan to go to Haran. It tells us. Um, so Jacob had, according to what we had read before, spent time in the tent. Esau is the one who goes out and hunts and explores and stuff like that. Jacob's now, to some extent, forced into that world, to Esau's world. He's got to learn how to survive on outside. He doesn't have his, I mean, there's a certain level to this. He doesn't have his mom to protect him anymore. And again, he's an adult, at least according to the reference to the P author, he'd be 40. But let's just say we're back to the J author and we don't know. He's in his 20s. It doesn't matter. He's now old enough to be on his own, but he's not been on his own from what we know. And now he's on his own. And he's out in the open. He's exposed. There's a midrash that we'll get to when we talk more about Esau, was that Esau actually well, I'll just tell you the midrash now a little bit. But the midrash is that Esau is not anywhere near a point of forgiving him and is not going to wait around to get rid of his brother. So he actually sends his son out with a party to kill Jacob. And Jacob, while he's out on the road, is in fact almost killed by Esau's son and the party. And the only way he escapes was essentially either he escapes and leaves everything behind and like kind of jumps in the water and winds up with nothing, or he gives it to the family, the Esau's kids, and basically says, "Just tell your dad you killed me and took all my stuff." So the threat is really there because it actually happens. The implied threat is actually occurs in the midrash. But why that midrash even exists is because the rabbis asked the question. First of all, is Esau really going to let him get out alive? And number two, when Jacob gets to Haran eventually, he doesn't have anything. And so the rabbi said, why does he have nothing? When Isaac sends, or when Rebecca is bought, there's all these treasures. There's camels full of stuff. Why does Jacob show up there with nothing? And the reason that why that's so important is we're going to see Jacob having nothing means he has to work in order to get his wives, right? He has to pay in labor because he doesn't have money. So that's important, very important to the narrative. And the rabbis essentially said, what, he shows up with nothing? And the reason he showed up with nothing is because either Esau's family took it from him or he had to leave it behind because he was running away. But that's why he showed up with nothing. So that's part of it answers two questions. Did Esau really let him get out? And number two, why does he have nothing when he gets there? So it's an interesting midrash. And it's not like one midrash. It's like there's a whole set of midrashim about Jacob on the run, if you will. So this isn't just like he's in a dangerous situation. He was in danger. There was not just like it could have been. So Jacob out in Jacob on out in the open is scary for the rabbis. Of course, people talk about the fact that he puts a stone under his head, right? What's that about? Now, some people say that this was intentional so that he would have a special kind of dream. By putting a stone under your head, you were inviting that kind of dream. Um, that's a possibility. This also, of course, the stone becomes the altar, right? The stone that's there that he lies on ends up becoming holy. So that's definitely part of it. But there is this interesting setup here, which the rabbis point out in several midrashic areas here, which is that everybody focuses on the stairway to heaven, right? Everyone focuses on the ladder or the stairway, right? So the word sulam right here means ramp or ladder. People focus on that, and obviously there's a lot of midrashim about what's going on with this ladder, right? But if there isn't much. I mean, there's not a lot of description of it. It doesn't really say what's going on, but it does say that it was set on the ground. And one of the things that the rabbis touch on is that the the ladder, the ramp, the stairway has to touch the ground. It's not floating. And so they notice that the word artsah, eretz, the fact that it's on the ground means that you can't reach heaven. Angels can't come here unless they're really here. There actually has to be a contact with the earth. And, you can take that another level, which is that represents Esau's world. So Jacob, and to some extent, all of us are forced into being in the world. We can't just live in a world where, if you will, God exists because we're in such a higher elevated plane that we're not really in this world. There has to be a point of contact in this world. It has to be grounded, if you will, and you can use that image can be, electrical grounding, or that there's a bolt, that ladder is bolted into the ground. It's not floating, it's in the ground, and that there has to be a connection to the physical world. That's one of the interpretations in what we see in the ladder. Commentaries just on the fact that the angels, that people point out, the angels are going up, olim v'yordim. They're going up and they're going down. And rabbis ask, well, why does it say that they're going up first and then they're going down? What does that mean? They're going both ways, right? They're going up and down. By the way, that's very important. They're not just going up, they have to come down. There's angels going up and down. But people have said, well, look, there's movement both directions. Angels are going up and they're going down. So one of the midrashim is that the angels that are going up were the ones that Jacob sees, the angels that are going up were the angels that protected him when he was in the land of Canaan, and the angels coming down are the angels that are going to be with him when he goes into Haran. Because God does say, I'm going to be with you, right? I'm going to be with you all the time. I will protect you wherever you go. But it's interesting that the rabbis kind of are saying that when you're in Israel, you have a different set of angels. When you go abroad, or when we go abroad, and maybe if we live abroad, I don't know, there's different angels. There's a different set of angels that we get. It's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea that there's not one set of angels that protects us. There's different angels. We have a rotation. You could also say those are the angels that protected you during that day, and then the next rotation's coming back down to protect you now, the next day. But yeah, they like the idea that there's different angels that protect you when you're in Israel versus the angels that are with you on the road. But the angels are going back and forth. That is no doubt. They're going up and down. There's movement going both ways. Um, which of course is telling us that the angels, to some extent, um, there's a point where angels there's a place where the angels um, they don't just teleport wherever they are. There's a place where they go to go up and down. There's a exit and entry point for angels. Anybody want to comment on any of that stairway to heaven?
Yeah, don't the angels have wings?
Doesn't say that.
I know. I always thought they had wings. It seems like they could fly up and down. They don't need to walk up and down.
Where does the concept of angel with
Well, wait. Not only that. Not only that.
comes
What about
from?
what about just the angel appearing wherever they are? No, it seems as though angels, and again, this seems to be the case all the way through, uh, at least in Jewish texts, because we have it in the book of Tobit, the apocryphal, the deuterocanonical book of Tobit, that angels walk. They're walking around. They're amongst us here, but the idea that they have wings. Look, we know the seraphim. The Bible itself describes angels that have wings, right? But it seems as though that there are angels that are more like human beings, because the seraphim are not like human beings, right? They got wings, and they got wings upon wings. I mean, they're all wing. They're a lot of wings, but there are angels that look like people, and they seem to walk. And even if they're walking up and going back and forth to heaven, they're walking. So this is an interesting idea because, again, it seems to go against this idea that, well, they can just go anywhere and they have wings, or they could just appear somewhere. There definitely does seem to be, because we have a story in Samson of an angel who jumps on a fire and goes up in a sacrifice. That's the angel that tells Manoah and his wife that they're going to have a baby. So it seems like maybe sacrifices or altars are ways for people to, or for angels, not people, for angels to, if a person makes an altar, the angel can appear or move on the altar. And there also seems to be like this idea that they're not human beings. If the angel can jump on a sacrifice and kind of go up in the fire, then he ain't a person. But they look like people, and whatever they're bound by having to go up and down these portals, if you will. So look, some people say it sounds like some kind of space, teleportation, or it's a extraterrestrial or vehicle, um, because it's a ramp. I mean, the word sulam is also the word used for ramp. Some people say, well, he envisions a ziggurat. The ziggurats were, these amazing towers like the Tower of Babel, where it seems to go to heaven. This stairway, this ramp would go up to the sky. But all of those are possibilities. But more importantly, the angels are going up and down on this ramp. And they need, like, it seems to be that this is a needed thing. And we're going to see what Jacob says when he wakes up from this. And again, this is a vision, right? That does say that this is something that happened to him while he slept, you know? And it says it's a dream. But um what he hears in the dream, when he realizes that when God speaks to him in the dream, and God is speaking to him, it says God is speaking to him, but he is speaking to him in a dream. This is a little different than, of course, God appearing to Abraham and speaking to him, which the sages take up. The rabbis point out that Jacob is not in a place yet where God is just going to have an open conversation with him. God is speaking to him in a dream, which is not the same as God talking to you like Moses, first of all, at a burning bush when he first comes to him, or later on when God's speaking to him seemingly almost like having a conversation like you and I would have. So he is appearing to Jacob in a dream. But any other comments about this part? Because we are going to get to Jacob's response to this. But Jacob is basically told now by his father and now by God that you will be blessed. And essentially with the Abrahamic blessing, which is the families will, everybody is going to bless themselves by you and your descendants. But also, of course, part of this blessing is you will come home. You will come home. So Jacob will come home. Interestingly, he does not die at home. He'll wind up dying in Egypt. But there is this understanding that a bond has been made with God. But let's look at the response, unless anybody wants to say anything up till 15, because so far we've had the dream. All right, let's take a look at what really happens here. All right.
Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely God is present in this place, and I did not know it." "Shaken," he said. "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven." Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He named that site Bethel, but previously the name of the city had been Luz.
Yeah, so we have a story here of how Bethel got its name. What before we move on, don't move on yet. I know you probably just did because I told you not to, but Jacob's realization that he just came into contact with God. He says, God is present in this place. Bamakom hazeh. Anybody want to?
There's this tension in Judaism between God being everywhere and God being in a particular place.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there's something here, which is, that, of course, that Bethel will wind up being an important shrine for the Jewish people. It is one of the places where the Northern Kingdom had its temple. There was a temple at Bethel. This was one of the places Dan and Bethel were the two extreme north and south, Bethel being south, Dan being north. There was a temple in both sites during the times of the kings of Israel. They had a shrine in both places. And according to what we know about from the book of Kings, that there was a golden calf in each of those places. Not necessarily because God was the golden calf, as the implication is from the book of Exodus and the book of Kings, but, and again, that the diatribe against this is a statement of the Judahite and Jerusalem priests who are saying, don't go to Bethel. But, um, Jacob dedicating this place of Bethel in these verses are actually most likely from the author, who's a northern Israel priest, somebody who wants you to know that Bethel is very much a place of holiness. Again, the Jerusalem priests did not think Bethel was a place of, it might have been a place of holiness, but no more than any other place, and definitely not Jerusalem. But this is an explanation for how Bethel becomes a holy shrine. It's a holy shrine of Jacob. It goes all the way back to Jacob, a place where Jacob saw God, a place where Jacob makes a covenant with God. So this is super important. Now, the way Jacob tells it, I think at least, is that he didn't know. He says, I didn't know it. Now, there's a really interesting take on this, which was kind of a neo-Hasidic, if you will. It's written by Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, wrote a book called God Was in This Place, and I did not know. And it's based on the traditional reading, definitely a Hasidic reading of Va'anochi lo yadati, and I did not know. What is the I? The Anochi, the I? God was in this place and I did not know it because I was occupied with I. I didn't see it because the ego wouldn't allow me to see it. Which, of course, goes back to what we talked about before, which is, who are we? The question of who we are, to some extent, then also cannot be, it's only about me. It's not, my ego cannot be the only thing that inhabits this, because if it inhabits my life or inhabits my moment, every waking moment, I won't see God. So when Jacob's ego recedes, when the I goes down, this is the Kushner reading of it and the Hasidic reading of it, that's when I can see God. So when Jacob is asleep, that's when he's a little bit more prone to obviously seeing beyond himself. And the key here, the key word here is, of course, the Anochi. That's the word. I mean, that's the Anochi. Because it doesn't just say, I didn't know it, or it doesn't say, because lo yadati means I didn't know it. The Anochi is the formal I, which you didn't have to have. And that's why it evokes and it encourages the reading of it, where we got to explain this word, the I, which again in his book, Kushner's book, is I, I did not know. The I is repeated there.
Mark, we've got to leave early. Thank you.
All right, take care. What do you take out of that? I mean, anybody have any? And again, it's repeated by or emphasized by how awesome is this place, right? And it says, it doesn't only say how awesome is this place, it says Vayira and then Manora. The word awesome is doubly translated by shaken. How awesome is this place? It could have said, and in awe, he said, how awesome is this place? Whatever you want to say. And in reverence, he said, how awesome is this place? The word Yira is used twice, Yira and Manora, which is how awesome, how, you know, how amazing is this place? Because the word's used twice. Anybody have any? One other repeated word. Yesh Adonai bamakom hazeh and manorah hamakom hazeh. This place, right? This place is repeated. Now, again, you can make the argument. Well, what else are you going to say, right? Got to call it something. But the the fact that it's called hamakom and that it's bamakom is hamakom again used there. This place again, we could say, um, well, it's because Bethel is going to become the place. But obviously, there's a deeper meaning to this, and people took away, hey, this isn't one place that God is. God is in every place. God is in every place where we allow ourselves to see God. It's not like you have to be in Bethel. You could be right here, right where you are right now, and realize you're in Hamakom. You're in that place. It's just your awareness of it, right?
I've heard it said, that God is in that place. This is holy ground that we stand on, that we take care of the planet, the earth. This is all holy ground. This
Yep.
is where God is.
Yeah, but here's the crazy fact that we also say that Hamakom is one of the names of God. It's not just that God is in a place, God is the place. We call God Hamakom. It's one of the words that we use for God. We actually use it in some place, in some situations where you'd go, why did you say that? Does anyone know one of the times that we say it that you'd be like, why did you call God Hamakom there? Anybody? Anybody know? Judith, do you know?
Nope. Don't know.
What
I
do
don't
we say?
know.
What do we say to a mourner when we say to them, well, I put it at the end of all the sad newses, right? I put it in English. Hamakom yenachem etchem betoch shar avalei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God comfort you amongst all the mourners in our community. We say, we say Yerushalayim, but we don't mean like literally Jerusalem. Hamakom Yenachem. May God comfort you. But we call God in that moment Hamakom. Hamakom Yenachem. May God comfort you. May God give you comfort. But we use the word Hamakom. We don't say Adonai. We say Hamakom. And it's interesting that
So
we
it's a
use it.
reminder that God is there. God is with you.
Yeah, that God's in this place. You don't have to be
Yeah.
in synagogue. You don't have to be at the cemetery. You don't have to be, you're right now in the presence of God.
What a
And so
wonderful time to say that.
and
Yeah.
that's when we say it. That's one of the few, like it's not the only place, but it's one of the times when I say when do we use the word hamakom? When do we use that phrase? That is one of the ones that like I see all, and it's not the only place, but it's one of the most common is in that moment when we say what we say to a mourner. That's what you're supposed to say before you leave the shiva house. Like if you want to do the traditional thing, that's the phrase you say. Hamakom yenachem b'toch sha'ar levi Tzion v'Yerushalayim. Sometimes I say it at the end of a funeral. Sometimes I say it. I always say it if we're going to send out an announcement, but that's the traditional saying. Interestingly, where does this play out in today's world? Well, just a couple years ago, in the Jewish community, there was a major merger of two synagogues that had been part of the San Fernando Valley for years and years and years, most of my life. Temple Aliyah and Shomrei Torah, which itself was a merger of several synagogues. Congregation Beth Kodesh and the Beth Ami of the Valley all became eventually Shomrei Torah. Well, Shomrei Torah and Temple Aliyah just merged a couple of years ago. Two very large conservative synagogues in West Hills. And what did they call themselves when they merged? They had to come up with a name, and they didn't use either of the two names. They didn't use Shomrei Torah or Aliyah. They renamed themselves Hamakom. Hmm. Now, they're not saying they're God. They're saying they're the place. But they also know that that meaning also conveys this idea that this is a holy place, a Beit El. So it's a clever name. Some would say it's a maybe some people who are very traditional might say it's not a good thing because you're not supposed to call the place God. There are some traditions that you should never call a synagogue Bethel, the house of God. You can call it Beth, you can call it Beth Israel, you can call it Beth Kodesh, you can call it Beth, excuse me, you can call it Beth Israel, Tefillah, house of prayer, uh, Beth Torah, but you're not supposed to call it Bethel. And there are Bethels, by the way. I just want you to know that there's not like one Bethel. There's a Beth there used there's a Bethel in La Jolla. There's Bethels all across the country.
Oh, I just came
Interesting.
from a Bethel in Riverside.
Yeah, there's not. It's not like it's not used, but
Yeah.
there
My
was a tradition.
my
There was
Mark
a
my
tradition.
Mark grew up at a Bethel in
There was
Rochester.
a tradition for a long time of when people were naming synagogues that they were not supposed to call it Bethel, and you'll never see an Orthodox Bethel. Um, so you are not supposed to have the audacity to say this is the house of God. You can say it's a house of prayer. You can say it's the house of Israel. It's the house of our people, Beth Ami. But you cannot say it's the Bethel. It's too. That's a little too presumptuous, I would say. So yeah, and Jacob here, maybe in a simplistic way, in the way that, the simplest reading of this is that God says, he says, God is in this place, and I'm going to make a temple here. I'm going to make a altar here. It's going to be eventually something really big. But it's also, again, in our understanding in the Hasidic traditions, and going back even to the Midrash, especially again for people who, by the time the Midrash was written, Bethel was long ago not a holy site anymore, it had been destroyed, and Jerusalem had been built and then destroyed, and then sometime in some of the Midrashim destroyed again, because the later Midrashim after the temple was destroyed. But the point of a God being in a certain place, needing to be in a certain place, was definitely not as important. That God was now with us in exile, and God can be with us in any place. But
I also like the idea, like conservation, that this is our planet. We need to take care of it. God is, especially as you're smelting there in the heat, and I'm not in Oregon.
no, no, no. I know, I hear you.
That this is a holy place, and we need to take care of it.
Well, that's definitely, by the way, you could say one of the takeaways um from this, which was that this is a place where um if you look at it, that God is there needs to be the eretz. There needs to be a point of connection with the Adamah, with the earth. That yeah, this doesn't work unless the angels the angels are coming, the angels are getting their feet dirty, right? They're walking on the earth. This is not angels floating. This is angels walking. And the point where it touches the earth is there, right? It says, it says right here, if you will, the whole thing is actually a contact with the earth. Um, that he takes obviously a stone, um, and it says avnei hamakom, right? The word makom is used there as well. But the fact that the angels are on the eretz, they're artsah, they're on the ground. And the word again is used here, haaretz. The ground on which you are lying is the ground where your descendants will live as well. You shall be again ka'afar, like the dust of the earth. It's very important, if you think about it, that this word is used. And it also, if you will, and I'll just say, maybe it wasn't intentional, but it's there, mishpachat ha'adamah, right? It doesn't just say the people of the world, right? It doesn't say the olam. It says the people, the families, the mishpachat, which is everybody, ha'adamah, the families of the earth. It doesn't say all the people. It says mishpachat adamah. And of course, that word goes back to the earth. That's Adam, the families of the earth. So to use your, Gail, to use your connection to the earth and why the earth needs to be protected and why it's used over and over and over again in these 6 verses. Aretz several times, 4 or 5 times. Adamah also there too. So yeah,
Rabbi,
definitely misunderstanding.
with all the emphasis on the earth and the dirt and such, let's go back to that one verse where it said he picked up a stone. Um, he picked one of the stones up, or he took.
Yep. The stone.
Now, are we supposed to believe that this stone is chosen at random, or is there something particular about this stone that allows Jacob to have the vision? And are there magical stones out there like crystals from the New Age people that have these spiritual?
Ooh, cool. I like that.
Oh yeah. I mean,
But
we have the
right.
whole stones on the breastplate thing on the Torah.
Oh, right.
yeah, but the idea of a dream stone, many people have written about this. I mean, this is there are people who say that that this is that there is something that there's something about this tradition, that this is that that people that people would in other cultures would use stones or put stones. Look, part of the cultural anthropology of this would be that people intentionally put a stone under their head so they would have these kind of dreams because they wouldn't have a good, like, the science behind it, or whatever if you want to call it, was that it would force somebody to have these kind of dreams because they wouldn't be comfortable, and they would have these kind of lucid dreams while they were sleeping where they would remember the dream. I mean, that's what you know some people would say. But this specific stone, this stone of Jacob was but people said that, like, look, there's a tradition. I mean, of ridiculousness that I have to break, but it's a good point. I mean, thank you for bringing it up. I'm going to tell you this. There's Scottish legends that the stone of Scone was actually the stone of Jacob that was brought by Jeremiah to uh, Ireland first, and then it made its way to Scotland. Um, they actually call it, the Saxum Jacobi, that they believed it. There were people that believed it. So no, they loved that stone in particular. That this is the Jacob stone. Ends up taking on a life of its own. But you know, this is definitely a moment where Jacob's life goes into into the direction that it needs to go. And so yeah, if you want to follow the midrash on this, there's other midrashim about it. But again, for people who study it from a cultural from the cultural anthropology, or comparing it to other cultures, there are other people who say that there were dream stones, and that people would use stones to kind of like the dream catchers that Native Americans would use, that they would help us. The stone would kind of like retain the dream, and then you it would have some kind of power. But yeah, no, this is definitely um, part of what goes on here. But of course, Jacob, by pouring oil on it, dedicates it. Right? He dedicates this stone for posterity, which again, we follow the idea that this is the author establishing the cult sites of Israel, especially the northern kingdom. Jacob did this, and this is why it's there. Um, this is going to tell us, yeah, there was a name for this place before, but we don't call it that anymore because it's called Bethel now. Um,
But this is interesting, just looking at the next line here, because what I was thinking was that up to now, Jacob's relationships with everybody have been very, material and transactional. And all of he has this moment of transcendence, and then he goes right back to being transactional.
yeah. Well, well, yeah. There's a problem here, which is that Jacob never stops being Jacob,
Right.
and yeah, this is where we want Jacob to. But look, I mean, Jacob becomes better, but he's still the same guy, right? We can be better versions of ourselves, but we're still who we are. We're not going to change completely. That doesn't happen. But there is a better version of us, and um, um, uh, one could say, um, well, I'm just going to show it to you. I I sometimes have this going on in the background, just so you know. This is the documentary hypothesis text. This is the author's text. So this is the, as I told you, this is the P author telling the story about the wives, which is not the J author. The J author is like, you know, get out of here. And this is the J author here. But look at the teal color is the E author. The E author is talking about the the holiness of Bethel. And then the J author is going to get into the transactional part, which, if you look at it, Jacob never really gets it. Well, he does get it. No, that's not Jacob doesn't Jacob doesn't fully get it because they don't have. And again, what's the giveaway? It's that he uses the word Adonai, the Yud Hey Vav Hey, where the E author doesn't use Yud Hey Vav Hey. He just uses the word Elohim. So it goes, but I'm showing you this because it shows that it goes back and forth. The story is woven together. The E and the J stories are woven together. And we believe that the E and J woven together was done before the P author was written and before the P author was done also laid on top of it. But so there's an E and J editing that goes on before. And again, I don't do it a lot, but when it's important, and we will be important in some of the Jacob and Joseph cycles, that this is actually showing you that Jacob's really last words would have been in the J author, and sure, he said, "Surely God is in this place, and I knew it not. And if God be with me." Well, we haven't read it yet, but let's read it. But when you talk about the transactional part, but look, I mean, look, the way the story is woven together, you don't even have a full verse in some cases. You just have a clause, and and again, the reason we know that that's the clause is because of the use of the name of God of the Yud Hey Vav Hey. So that's why we have it. That's why when people look at the authorship, they will do that because they know that for one author using the word Adonai for God, for the J author, that's the way that he does it. And in a way, it kind of makes sense. The transactional nature of this is that I understand God, the God that is Yud Hey Vav Hey, the God that is the Lord that I have a personal relationship with, but it will be transactional. But let's read it. We didn't read it yet. Here's the part that we're talking about.
Jacob then made a vow, saying, "If God remains with me, protecting me on this journey that I am making, and giving me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I return safe to my father's house. The Eternal shall be my God, and this stone, which I have set up as a pillar, shall be God's abode, and of all that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you.
And again, that's the way the chapter ends. It's not a bad break because the journeys will continue, and this is where we're gonna we're gonna
You know,
stop
I'm
here
I'm
because
really glad you divided that because I'd never looked at how transactional he is. What am I going to get out of this?
yes.
What's in it for
Now,
me?
now that being said, even the author is kind of saying, uh, I'm going to give a tithe. I'm going to give a tithe. But the tithe, um, the tithe is different. I mean, I think it's different. You maybe don't think it's different. The tithe is different to me than the transactional nature of his relationship with God. Because, um, and again, the rabbis have a way of reading this so that it's not as transactional. I'll explain in a second. Here they didn't. Uh, um, uh, it really goes back to this verse to 20 to the line here. It's im Yihye Elohim. If God remains with me, if God remains with me, then the Eternal shall be my God. And then it's conditional. If you don't translate im as if, which doesn't have to be. It seems as though that's the best translation. What would be the translation that's not as conditional? When, since. The word im can be translated that way.
Hmm.
When God is with me. But it's not usually translated that way because it seems like there's a bunch of conditions here. If God protects me on the journey, if God provides for me food and clothing, if I return back to my father's house, these are all things that it seems as though Jacob is saying, prove it. But again, if you don't translate it as im, it's not a bargain, but it's a prayer. And so the vow,
If it were when, right? When God remains with me, protects me, when I make it home, when I am not starving, doesn't it open him up to the option of not while he's traveling, of not being as
ethical.
as not being as ethical, if you will, or going along with, say, a father-in-law or a wife who have idols?
I
Would you
never
look at
thought
it
of it.
that way
I
or
never, I
not?
never, I never thought of it that way. I never thought of it that way. I guess it could, but in the end, Judith, it doesn't really protect us from anything because Jacob doesn't stop doing this kind of stuff when he gets back home. I mean, you can make the argument that Jacob does a lot of bad stuff, but you can make the argument that the worst thing he does hasn't even done yet, and that's what he does to his own what he does to his own sons by putting Joseph, making them all hate Joseph. I mean, what he does in that process. I mean, you could make the argument, yeah, what he does to his brother is like that's horrible. But you could also say that he's only fulfilling biblical prophecy at that stage, right? Because we know that Rebecca's been told that he's going to be the one. So he's not really doing anything other than what he's supposed to be doing or and he didn't even do it. His mother told him to do. I mean, he did, but he's following his mother's orders. But when he preferences Joseph, that's him. That nobody told him to do that. So you can make the argument that and by the way, he does other stuff too, right? When he's in Levant. I'm only telling you, it's an interesting reading, and I think it might even be borne out by some of the traditions, which is that when you're out in the open, when you're in a situation where you're kind of vulnerable, you're not. It's not that you're not as responsible to play by the rules or to be ethical, but I think there is some kind of understanding that like sometimes you got to do what you got to do to survive. There is that within Judaism, this kind of, well, we got to, this is what we have to do now in this situation. But I mean, I've never read it that way. I mean, but again, it could be that there is that sense that you know he's not when he's not at home. But look, for Jews who've lived outside of the land of Israel for the last 2,000 years, that's not going to give us any. That's not going to give us much other than I guess you can make the argument when we're not living in Israel, we're vulnerable and we have to do whatever we have to do to survive. I don't know that people have read it that way, but it's an interesting one because you could make the argument that that is what Jews did. Um, Gosh, I mean, Philip Wasserman just sent me an article in the Atlantic about the Jews that originally uh, supported Hitler.
Jews that supported Hitler?
Yeah, it's in the Atlantic. It's a really
Oh,
interesting piece.
okay.
I mean, because obviously there's a lesson for us here. You know,
Yes.
there's a lesson for
Uh,
us about Jews that support people who don't have really, to put it mildly, our best interests at heart on both sides. By the way, I mean you can read it both ways. I think there's certain fascist elements that are still very real that are more found on the right, but there are definitely are a lot of people who are Democrats who are feeling this now from their party. Look, I think that's why he actually sent it to me. I know that's why he sent it to me.
Yeah, I
But
I could see that, if you were like violently anti-Stalinist.
yeah, I do think though, as I was reading the article, that you have to be conservative. You have to be on that other side. And I've talked about it before, and Rosemary, you know this because you've read the book, but I think it's the Jonathan Haidt type of
Yes.
understanding of like what drives people to be conservative or liberal,
Uh-huh.
those qualities that they have within themselves that their personality traits. But that being said, it's an interesting question because it gets to what Judith just raised, which is this a statement about like what do diaspora Jews have to do? I didn't say you said that, Judith. I'm just saying I went there when you kind of made it that Jacob doesn't have to Jacob's full responsibility to some extent doesn't happen until he gets back home. But
Because
you
there,
brought that
and also
you
because
brought
there,
that you brought that up, and I think it's a
yeah,
great point. I just think it does open up to a whole bunch of interesting readings about how we've lived for the last 2,000 years. It's an interesting one. You definitely could write an interesting midrash on what Jacob, how he represents us in this. Yeah, what are you going to
it
say? You were
it goes along with what you started to say that we're going to get into more about the new reading of Aesop, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
it's a little more
Which by itself is another interesting thing.
diasporic, if you will.
Which I will give you the little teaser on this, which is we need to behave a little bit more like Esau, and that's the reading of the more modern reading of the Jacob Esau split, which is that we need to reintegrate Esau into us and accept that. which again, we'll get to it, I promise. But that's a whole nother conversation, and we got 5 minutes left. I will say again, the different readings of this, which are the conditional one, which is the one that we normally have, which is prove it, prove it, right? Jacob still is in the little immature state, which is, I don't know, right? You got to show me. The other one, which is it's not conditional, it's that God will do this, and this is not a bargain. This is, I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you this, which again is borne out a little bit better by the textual elements being different authors. But there's another interpretation, which is that Jacob had a dream. It's an extraordinary dream, but it's still a dream. I have to live this to prove that the dream was real. And that's a pretty modern take, right? Which is that, yeah, we can have a dream, we can have an ecstatic moment even, but let's see how it plays out, right? Let's see what actually happens, right? If I have this moment of clarity and then it doesn't really affect anything else of my life, like what does it mean? So there's a certain, is this real? Is this real? Which is not the conditional, bargain. It's also not, okay, it's an agreement. It's something else, which is maybe the whole thing isn't real. Like maybe it's not a matter of whether, I mean, it's a little bit similar to the first, but it's not, which is, I don't know. I don't know if I don't need God to prove it to me, that's the worst, if you will. Maybe I don't say it. I don't want to make a judgment of it, but I think most of us would say if Jacob is doing this, then it's really sad that he hasn't gotten it yet. Which again, he's human. He's a human being, but it's really not what we want to see necessarily. But if he's more of, and I'm not really sure that what I just had was real, then that I think is a little bit more honest, more something maybe we can uh, feel a little bit more personal, connection with. But yeah, a lot of us are constantly making deals with God. The bargaining with God business is something that people do all the time, and that is the fact that our belief and our relationship with God is conditional. Prove it, protect me, feed me, heal me. So
It's part of the reaction to loss when and he's just lost his home.
yeah, but
He's
we also
mourning. That's
we can
part of
also
mourning.
we could also say, yeah, that he also just is. We haven't seen it, again. It's that balancing act that the rabbis try to make, which is that he's our ancestor. He must be good, but at the same time, have we really seen him be good yet? You weren't here
Right.
last week, but one of the things that we did discuss was when Jacob is told by his mother, it's time to deceive your dad. He doesn't say, "Hey, mom, maybe it's not a good idea for us to deceive my
Mhm.
father, but what if we get caught?" Right? That's his answer. What if we get caught? He doesn't say we
Yeah.
shouldn't do it. He says, "What if we get caught?" So we haven't seen enough from Jacob yet to say that he's really a good dude. He's obedient, I guess. Maybe that's the best thing we can say is that he's obedient to his mother. Um, but we haven't really seen him do anything exceptional yet. We haven't seen him do anything righteous yet. But yeah, this idea of his first encounter with God, it's an interesting one because at the very least, or I would say, there's definitely some questions here, and it is possible even that his first his first connection with God here it's the first step, but there's a lot more that needs to happen to him, a lot more development that he has to go through. And then at a certain point, just think about this. Jacob's encounter is traditional in a way, but he's going to have to experience God. His connection with God, it says right here, is going to be, you know, I brought I brought your father and your grandfather into this relationship, but your experience is just starting. Your your connection to God is so far with your family, right? The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. Now we're going to have a relationship. And it's just starting. This is only the first meeting, and there's going to be more. And the difference, of course, with Jacob is this is the first character we're going to read in the Bible where we see that development. We see his character development, and we also see his relationship with God develop from a family God with a God that, he says before your God to Isaac, to a sense that it's his God. And I'm not going to ruin the story by telling you that when Jacob becomes Israel, his name means the one who struggles with God. His final, closest, whatever you want to say, his deepest connection with God is not easy, which is interesting because that's what we're named after. So even though we inherit religion and the religion at some point becomes a personal experience religion, it's not necessarily any easier. That's that's the totality again of this Jacob experience, that why it's so powerful is again, it's so real, and again, it's not easy. So this is the first experience of many. And yeah, we're just starting. So we'll be back next week, and we get to meet Rachel. We get to see Jacob start to relate with other people in a interesting way, because we're going to see him relate. We've seen him relate with his parents. We're going to see him relate with his spouse and then spouses, and then we're going to see him relate with his children. And all of these things are going to say a lot about Jacob, but they're going to say a lot more about us. So we'll be wrestling with God in the coming weeks. Um, so thank you, Rosemary, for being here. Now, if you want, we got to hear Esau cry last week. If you want to go back and watch that one, Rosemary, that was it was a as Judith said, you get to start having a little bit more appreciation for Esau as well. I think in this story, at least the way we've been reading it this year. Well, thank you, everybody, and maybe we'll see you tomorrow night. We're talking about Jews and comics, and not just comics, because we're expanding it into something that I think is real important, which is something I've mentioned, and I will definitely mention it again. I've mentioned it over the last few weeks. This is the R. Crumb illustrated Genesis. We're going to be talking about graphic novels as well, because Jewish contributions to comics are well known. We're going to talk about it. Going to talk about maybe some aspects of it that you don't know. And of course, there's an ongoing exhibit at the Skirball on Jews and comics, but it's also Jews and graphic novels, because one of the most successful graphic novels of all time is one that called Mouse. So we'll be talking about that. But also, again, I was just talking to somebody about this again, the R. Crumb Illustrated Genesis, adult supervision recommended for minors. It's the only time that they've actually put the proper warning on a Bible.
On a
which is
Bible.
Adult supervision recommended for minors. All right, everybody, we'll see you later. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.